Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of Mark My Brain. This episode will be all about learning and studying difficult things and how to make it easier and maybe more pleasurable. So, whether you are at school, working, or just want to learn something in your free time, knowing some learning techniques and principles can be the difference between success and failure, satisfaction and frustration, and can save you a lot of time as well as stress. Expect to learn specific techniques and approaches to learning, or the mistakes to avoid when you are studying or learning, and some general tips to make your learning sessions more productive and efficient. I am still at school, at university, so maybe I will tie these chapters and this topic more to the classic studying at uni. But as I mentioned, that doesn't mean you can't use it if you need to learn something for your job or just in your free time. So let's just dive right into it. Let me begin by commenting on the environment you are studying or learning in. I think it's important to pick a workspace that works best for you. And that is, of course, very individual. Some people study best at home. For example, I don't have a problem with that. I can focus very well at home in my own room, but some people can't. Even some of my friends are just, I can't focus when I'm at home. I need to go somewhere else. And that's fine. Just, reflect on it a bit and find what works best for you. If you can't focus at home, just go to a cafe or just go outside on some bench and study there. It can be whatever, but yeah, try to pick a workspace or environment that best suits you. Other important point that's tied to environment is to eliminate the distractions. And this is a big one. A thing that comes to mind probably for all of us is our phone. I think you know it very well, that if you are trying to focus on some work or on studying or whatever, and you have your phone just beside you laid on the desk, you will probably more often than not just regularly pick it up and check the notifications, check the Instagram, scroll a few reels, answer a few messages, and that completely breaks your focus. Or at least that's how it is for me, and from what I've talked about with my friends, they feel the same way. So I think this is pretty universal experience. So I think I already mentioned this in some of my other episodes, but just if you need to focus, if you need to do some deep work, just take your phone and put it on the other side of the room where it's out of reach, and you will be surprised about the wonders this simple step can do. What also ties to this is to prepare and tidy your desk, or generally the place of your choice where you will study, because if you have a cluttered desk or even a room, I think your mind also is sort of cluttered and can't focus very well. A clean environment is generally, I would say, better, because again, there's less distractions, the environment is less chaotic, and that reflects on your, I would say, attitude and mind as well. I think there's already some evidence for this as well. Ideally, you should also be in silence, but that might be a controversial statement. It's just my hunch that if you are in silence, you can truly devote all of your attention to what you need to study or learn. But I know that some people like to, for example, listen to music while studying. But for example, for me, it just doesn't work. I start vibing with the music, and for maybe singing a little bit or something, and again, my focus is just broken. So again, maybe this is something that's very individual, but yeah, maybe test it out. if you perform better if you're in silence, or perhaps in some music, some background lofi, or just full on blasting music in your headphones. Try it out, test it, but I would perhaps advise for working in silence. In general, when it comes to environment, try to prepare everything so that there is as little friction to deep dive into the materials and topics as possible. I think all of those little advices tie into this one. You need as little friction and as little challenges to truly focus and deep dive into what you need to study as possible, to make the experience as smooth as possible. Now, continuing on some basic tips and principles about studying, I would start with saying that just reading isn't studying, because you need to actively engage with the topics and materials. Sure, if you read a chapter or read some notes, you can memorize some of them, and if you have a good memory, perhaps that is all you need to pass an exam or a test. But I would argue that isn't really studying, It's just memorization, and it can be part of studying, but hopefully you know what I mean. If you truly want to study, if you truly want to learn, you have to actively engage with the topics. Ideally, you should create a system or processes around learning, especially if you are learning, for example, for your finals, and there is a lot that you need to learn. It's better to create a system of learning, spread it out over several days and plan it out, prepare some strategies so that you don't rely solely on motivation, because in many cases you will have none. Especially in uni, you just don't really feel like studying a lot of times. So creating a system sort of prevents the pitfall of, I don't have motivation, and you start procrastinating, and suddenly it's already evening and you didn't even start to study, and the exam is tomorrow, and it's just a disaster. If you create a system, plan it out, it's usually so much better and, again, more efficient. I already mentioned try to space out the practice, because what I've found, and what I've also found evidence for, is that all-nighters are much less effective than dedicating the same time, just spacing it out over several days. And I will give you an example of one of my close friends. She always starts studying for an exam last minute. She doesn't have any plan, usually pulls an all-nighter right before the exam, the typical last-minute studying student type. And unfortunately, often the results simply aren't what she was hoping for. And I think it's just because of this, because she doesn't have a plan for her study, she procrastinates, she, again, relies only on the motivation, and which then leads to the procrastination. She doesn't plan it out and leaves it for last minute. And I truly believe that if she started a few days earlier, spaced out her practice and learning, and ideally had a strategy, she would learn much more and easier, and for the exam she wouldn't be even sleep deprived. So overall, the performance and the efficiency would be so much better, and she wouldn't have to spend more time even on studying. But yeah, it's about, I would say, planning and then following through with that plan. Not relying on motivation, but more on discipline. And maybe the last point for some key principles is that you shouldn't try to memorize, you should try to understand. And again, I feel like this is very simple but so important, because even when I look in my friends' circle, so many of them, when they are studying for an exam, are just memorizing, just rereading the notes and just memorizing. And sure, again, as I mentioned, it can work. You can pass the exam like this, but I would argue that it's not really learning again if you are not trying to understand the topics. And if you come to the topics and to the stuff you need to learn from the perspective of I want to understand this, not just memorize it, perhaps it is even easier to learn it then, because this opens another, I would say, way or path towards learning the stuff, not just brute forcing it with memorizing it. And I found that a great way for me to truly learn something is to first study the stuff by myself and learn the bulk of it, perhaps using the methods we'll discuss in a minute. But then to really lock it in, really lock in the knowledge, I like to teach it to someone else. For example, a friend preparing for the same exam. And in the process of me trying to teach them, at first I might not know 100% of the stuff I'm trying to teach them. So again, I refer back to my notes and to the workbook, and I relearn or revise some chapters or many topics that I am not 100% understanding. But because I'm trying to teach it to someone else, it really solidifies all that I've learned in myself, and I understand it better. I oftentimes realize some, for example, principles or ties between chapters or topics that I previously didn't notice, and it just overall it really locks in what you've read and helps you and hopefully even the friend that you are trying to teach. So I recommend this. You can try it, and hopefully it will have the same great results as it has had for me. And now let's take a look at some specific learning or studying techniques. The first one I would like to mention is called PQR, or oftentimes PQ4R. And this name is because this technique splits the learning process into 6 phases, I would say. Preview, question, read, reflect, recite, and review. And it helps you test yourself on your already acquired knowledge and tells you on which chapters you should focus and what you should revise again. Let's go through the phases more specifically. The first one is preview. In this step, you should only skim the chapter and only focus on finding the big ideas explored in the chapter, in the topic, and you are just focusing on trying to generally get the idea what the chapter is about. Then comes the phase of questioning. When you get a clear idea of what the chapter will explore, you should start making questions related to the topic. Many workbooks, if you've noticed, also have questions in the beginning of each chapter precisely for this reason. You are sort of telling yourself, what questions am I trying to find answers for? Then, of course, comes the big step of reading the chapter. In this step, you just thoroughly read through the materials with the intent of truly understanding the ideas explored. This is the deep dive into the materials. Then you reflect. Following the previous phase, you answer the questions of the second step and find out if there are details you should read again. Perhaps you didn't find all of the answers you were hoping for, or you don't quite understand all of them. And also the important bit in this phase is that you have to be able to answer them for yourself. not with the help of notes or rereading the chapters, but you should be able to answer the questions for yourself. The fifth phase is recite. In this step, you should summarize the chapter in your own words. And maybe this is the step that I could tie to my point from the previous topic, is that you can practice it as if you're explaining it to someone else, as if you are trying to teach it to someone. Or you can truly try to teach it to someone, the chapter and the materials you have learned. And the last step of PQR technique is review. It's the reflection part. You go over the materials again and see if you are confident in all of the chapters, in all of the topics. You truly understand all of the principles explored in the chapters, and you just see if you are truly confident about the knowledge you have gained. So that's the PQR technique: preview, question, read, reflect, recite, and review. I think it's pretty nice. You split out the learning session into several steps. It makes it maybe more manageable, I would say, and you have a clear plan, which again I think is very important. The next technique I would like to introduce you to is so-called Pomodoro technique. And it doesn't necessarily have to be just for studying. You can apply it to different tasks as well, for example, for working or whatever, because it's mainly a time management technique, not necessarily specifically a learning or studying technique. It's a time management technique. And simply, it breaks down the work into intervals, typically 25 minutes of work and 5 minutes of resting or a break. And this allows you to go through big tasks in manageable bite-sized chunks through which you can chew pretty easily. It can also help with the initial motivation or with starting the task, which I found is often the biggest challenge of it all, because now you don't feel overwhelmed by the whole task. You've again split it up into concise chunks that you can manage easily. And a fun fact, it's known as Pomodoro because you can very effectively use a kitchen timer for it. And the kitchen timers often come in the shape of a tomato, which in Italian is Pomodoro. So that's the reason behind the name. Again, it's something I recommend. It's better than having no plan. It's simple, straightforward. So that's Pomodoro technique. And the third technique I want to explore here is called Leitner system. And it's apparently one of the best study techniques based on flashcards. Now, if I'm being honest, I've never really used flashcards for studying, but I know many people that like to use flashcards, perhaps because it's sort of studying gamified. In the very least, it sounds like more fun than just reading and trying to understand it from a text or chapter. But the Leitner system is again pretty straightforward. You prepare your flashcards as well as several boxes, for example, 3 boxes. And the rules of the system are very simple. Every flashcard starts in box number 1. If you get a card right, you move it to the next box, so box number 2. And if you get a card wrong, you move it down a box or keep it in box 1 if it's already there. And each box determines how much you will study the set of cards in that box. For example, the flashcards in box 1 you will revise every day. The flashcards in box 2 every 2 or 3 days. And the cards in box number 3, for example, every week. And this system is based on spaced practice or spaced repetition, and addresses something illustrated by the forgetting curve, if you are familiar with it. In simple terms, every time you practice a new fact or skill, you are exercising that particular mental muscle. And as it gets stronger, you'll be able to remember that fact or skill for longer. And it will also take a longer time to forget. So that's the reason why you start with all of the cards in box number 1 that you revise every day. And if you get some flashcards correct, it's a sign that you perhaps already remember them. You know that fact, you know the answer to them. So you move it to the box 2, where you don't have to revise or practice them that often, and you can focus more on the flashcards in the box number 1. And if you truly know something, you can practice it just once a week. For example, it's in the box number 3, where the flashcards that are there should be something that you already truly remember, probably for a longer time. You understand it and don't forget it as easily. So yeah, using the flashcards can be simple, I would say non-intense and almost playful way to learn something. Try this Leitner system. It sounds again as maybe a fun technique how to learn something, and yeah, try it out. Hopefully it will bring the results you are hoping for. And now, last but not least, for the last part of this episode, I would like to just go over one meta-analysis that I've come across. Meta-analysis of 10 different learning techniques. And it ranked the different learning techniques. It sorted them by efficiency based on the findings of the study. The highest rated practices are distributed practice and practice testing. Again, I would like to put emphasis on that it's both practices. It's not just reading, it's practicing it. And, distributing practice and practice testing, you are testing yourself with the knowledge, or having a test exam is something that you have to be actively engaged in. If you remember one of the first principles we talked about, to truly learn something, you have to be actively engaged in it. So the highest rated practices are distributed practice and practice testing, and they are followed by elaborative interrogation, which is basically generating exhaustive answers to why some statements about the topic are true, and self-explanation. Again, these are something that you have to be actively engaged in. You are maybe testing yourself, and you are actively trying to recall the knowledge and the information you have read and you have learned. And that's why it's at the top of the list. At the bottom of the effectiveness were rereading, underlining, and summarization, which, if you've paid attention throughout this episode, should be no surprise. These findings basically confirm a lot of what we've talked about here today. The importance of active periodic practice and engagement with the materials. The study also suggests that even the bottom practices can be very useful when first encountering the materials, if you are not familiar with them. However, when one becomes familiar with what he wants to learn, the higher techniques have significantly better results. And that's where the key to truly learning something lies. And with that, I think this episode has come to its natural end. I hope that you learned something here today, and that now you will just be an absolute academic weapon and crush all your exams or tests in your work or whatever you are studying or need to study for. Try out the different techniques we've discussed, try to implement the principles we talked about, and good luck with your learning journey and with your study sessions. And with that, I say goodbye to you. Hear you soon. Bye.